Welcome to the Night Tube. I'm Stephen Knight, and I'm very pleased to welcome filmmaker and host of On the Edge podcast, Andrew Gold. Andrew, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. I've been looking at some of the work you've been doing recently, and a lot of our interests seem to have crossed paths and aligned. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that, especially your documentary on exorcism, which I found fascinating. Before we do that, maybe you could just tell me a little bit about yourself. How do you describe what it is you do? What's your background?
My background, I would say the easiest way to explain it is like a little bit like what Louis Theroux does, but not as successful or famous or good. But yeah, documentaries, videos, whatever, where I'm on screen and I sort of wind people up a little bit who have very extreme beliefs, but also try to get to the bottom of why they have those beliefs. It's been harder and harder to make documentaries for a living and get them put on BBC and stuff like that, which I'm sure we'll get to. So otherwise I write and I'm a journalist and I have a podcast where I talk to, the kinds of people I would be talking to in the documentary. Some crossover with yours as well, but also like, psychopaths and a paedophile I had on one time and just some of the most crazy eccentric people you can imagine.
Right. I suppose one of the things I tend to find as well is, if you're somebody who's creating content and you're interviewing people and that's what you do, you're sometimes going to go to people who might be on the fringes of the extreme, or certainly not extremism in the violent sense, but extremism in terms of the Overton window and what we think socially acceptable, taboos, things like transgress norms, etc. Do you find people take a dim view of you for hosting these people? Do you find there's a sort of guilt by association going on?
Yeah, people take a dim view of me, full stop. But with this stuff, yeah, I think the Overton window is a really good point because I definitely find myself becoming desensitized to certain subjects. So paedophilia is one of them, and it's to me, it's no different to any other one. Exorcism got me a lot of flack online. On YouTube, it's had 600, 500,000 views or something. BBC, it's probably had the same. But the comments underneath, you want them as a journalist, you want them to be saying like, what a fantastic journalist that man is. He asked all the right questions. As you can imagine, not a single comment says that. Every single one is like either, that priest was a bastard, or like a whole quote of like Leviticans something, from some nutter.
Yeah.
So people do get pissed off. So yeah, exorcism. I did a film on abortion as well. I'm drawn to controversial topics, partly because they're exciting and fun, partly because I like to try and understand people who think as differently from me as possible. And paedophilia was just an extension of that. But of course, it probably is the most sensitive topic in the world that there is. So people do move away straight away. They assume I'm either a sympathizer or secretly one myself or something like that. Whereas actually, I've been writing a book which is quite critical of a lot of. It's with non-offending paedophiles, ones who claim they are non-offenders, but the way they behave, the way they act, their cognitive biases are very religious and are really fascinating to me. So it is quite critical of them. It's certainly not sympathizing too much, but people still get pissed off. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely a subject I think we'll circle back on and pick up and talk about your book, because that's really interesting. It'll be good to point out exactly where the lines are, how society views these things, and whether should it be considered a mental illness or just a pure form of evil. And there's a lot of emotions at stake for good reason. Are you currently in Berlin? Is that where you said you were? So how are they handling COVID there? What's the situation on the ground like?
Yeah, my family keep asking as well. And the thing is, I don't really know, because all the news I watch is English. All the people I speak to are English back home, on the phone and stuff, because I'm not allowed out. So I don't really know. Everything is shut. You can get takeaway standing outside and waiting. Shops are shut. Things are shut. Everything's rubbish. And I'm just hoping things are going to go back to normal soon. I think it's pretty much similar to what's going on in England.
Yeah, it's all very boring, isn't it? Just getting fatter and fatter and fatter.
I'm so fat now.
Can't get a haircut, and it's tragic. But obviously things could be much worse.
Looks lovely.
Thank you, appreciate it. So let's talk about your documentary on exorcism, because that to me is fascinating, and a lot of people, specifically in the UK or America and a lot of the English-speaking regions, would probably think of exorcism as something that's fairly antiquated, something archaic from the past, or part of sort of horror movie lore, and where in reality it's quite a thriving practice throughout certain parts of Europe and further afield, and can be quite lucrative as well. So let me just explain how you got interested enough in that topic to want to make a documentary on it.
Well, what tends to happen is that I just happen to be in the place where something is happening, So I was living in Buenos Aires for 6 years. I'm fascinated by languages. It's my favorite thing. So I got obsessed with learning Spanish and the Argentine dialect of it, which I love. It's just gorgeous. It's like this Italian mixed with Spanish and Portuguese. It's like everything together. So I happened to be living there for a while, looking at like what will be my next documentary. I made a few things on like UFOs and infidelity, because I found like cheating was more acceptable there. The Argentines hate me for saying that though. But exorcism, it's a little bit like in America, because we don't have those channels on TV so much in the UK, but those sort of channels where you'll have an evangelist and it's all taken very seriously. This guy was just going on TV on different channels in Argentina and just talking very seriously about like, the moon is in this part of the sky tonight and you got to be careful of vampires and stuff like that. And the funny thing about Buenos Aires in particular is that it's a very modern place. You might as well be in some sort of European hub. You're in Rome, you're in Madrid, that's where you are. And yet, obviously, you've got stuff that is so, as you said, antiquated and so modern as well. It's all mixed together. So you end up with this guy who's doing this stuff that you're thinking of like from 2,000 years ago or whatever, and mixing it with social media. He's amazing at social media. He's amazing at all the modern stuff and getting his message out. And he's standing beside, seasoned veteran news producers and things like that. And they're taking him seriously. I kept waiting for people to make the joke, the snide Sacha Baron Cohen joke that, and no one did. And then he's on the radio and then he's everywhere else. And I thought, I've got to talk to this guy. So it was just as simple as that. I thought it annoyed me that he was getting away with it. And I got in touch with him basically.
So your film, it does actually include a number of quote unquote exorcisms, and it can be quite a disturbing looking process, borderline to my eyes, abusive in a way. Maybe you can talk us through some of the process. How would they carry out an exorcism? What sort of things do they do?
Yeah, it was. So I have, even now looking back, we did 2 exorcisms. I took part in one of them, rung the bells and all of that.
That's one for the CV, isn't it?
Yeah, that's part of why I like doing these things. I love being able to look back and say, hey, I did this, I did that. I didn't go on a gap year to whatever. I went and performed an exorcism. It was even looking back now, probably the scariest couple of hours of my life. Each exorcism lasted around an hour. Yeah. Not because I believed anything paranormal even for a second. There's none of that. But the idea is that I guess we thought it was going to be funny. And we went in there and I wanted to take part and this was going to be fun and all of this stuff. And it very quickly dawned on me what happened was, we lay a woman down who was 17 years old and had been suffering with depression, had been trying to kill herself, all things that we would associate with schizophrenia, maybe bulimia, anorexia, a mix of those things. And she was sort of clamped down on the floor almost with other people's arms. And they just basically start hypnotizing her is the best way to explain it. Just, you've seen it, you've heard this kind of thing. They're saying in Spanish, the power of God compels you, the fire of God burns you, all this kind of thing over and over again. In the documentary, those exorcisms last a few minutes, but in reality, we were there for an hour each time. So it took a good 20 minutes before anything started to happen. So it was just constant, and the exorcist was getting louder and louder. The fire of God compels you, da, 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 like over and over and over. Then he's throwing water, so she's getting a physical sensation as well. She's getting physical, she's getting this, and she knows how she's expected to react. Yeah. There's obviously part of her aware that she's been brought in here. All these people around her are expecting her to act in a certain way. Eventually it starts to happen, and she started saying quite gruesome, horrible things, speaking as if she was someone else, saying, she's mine now, and all this stuff. I'm standing over here watching what appears to be a young girl going through a mental crisis, like nothing I should ever be witness to. We've got a camera there, and I'm ringing bells like an idiot. And I suddenly felt very like, this is inappropriate. I felt completely inappropriate. Like this isn't the Louis Theroux talking to alien believers. This is me in the middle of like a really serious thing. Yeah. So we made the decision right then, like if we do any more exorcisms after the first one, I'm not getting involved. I'm not standing there like a silly smiling guy. This is like, wow, this is serious stuff. and it's scary.
Yeah, there's a very tricky ethical consideration there, isn't there, in terms of being an impartial observer and actually taking part. So yeah, I mean, there was a part of the film which I thought was, I mean, it was fairly amusing to watch, where one of the clergy there were actually trying to have a similar effect on you with a process for you to sort of accept God. And it's interesting to see the reaction between somebody who's a skeptically minded person and somebody there who is already a believer, might be slightly more susceptible to whatever's being suggested. And obviously it didn't have the desired effect on you. And you pointed out the fact that the clergyman was actually putting a bit of pressure on you to try and encourage you to fall over. And if you had fell, that would have been proof of the power of God working through you. And it makes me wonder, how much of this do you think those in power in the church believe it to be true, in terms of they genuinely think they're channeling God into these people, or they know they're simply suggesting something to people who are already open and susceptible to it?
I think cognitive dissonance is such an important part of that, and I've really tried to think for so long whether the exorcist himself believes in what he does, because obviously from our point of view, from an atheist skeptic standpoint, either he's a snake oil salesman and he's a fake and he's a phony and this and that, and he knows what he's doing, or he believes he's some sort of god or whatever, and he thinks he's helping. And if that is the case, he must think I'm the devil. If he really believes he's helping all these people, curing cancer, curing depression, all these things, if he really believes that, imagine me, this sort of snarky, snidey guy walking in like that. I think it's got to be, again, the cognitive dissonance, it's got to be somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's really hard for me to say. I can't get inside his mind. And I also had to be, when we were making it, I had to be very careful of exactly what I said, because of, legally, this is the man's job. And I can't be seen to be, it's defamation of character and stuff if I'm to say he is a liar. So not that he's going to listen to this podcast, the guy doesn't speak a word of English, but I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think if he were to be really honest with himself, maybe a little bit like when you think of, gay conversion, for example, and somebody feels like they've been cured of being gay or something, which is ridiculous. But I'm sure if they really looked deep down inside themselves, they'd know it's not true. They haven't been cured of being gay. They are still gay. But they're putting on a front and trying to convince themselves. And I imagine he wants to keep telling himself, no, I can do God's will, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one, because you don't want to assume motives and sort of indulge in mind reading. Although, speaking of mind reading, I often find with people who claim to be psychic mediums that the techniques they employ are so, once you're aware of them, you can spot them a mile off, and there's no way that can be by accident, in a sense. So yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. I mean, maybe you could talk about one of the main issues with it is the fact that sometimes it does work, in the sense that the placebo effect is a documented phenomenon. You have people coming in with serious problems, and they take this experience as a cure, and then because of this mental shift, they actually go on to live more fulfilling lives. So I mean, that's a big issue, really, isn't it, when we're talking about things that can be quite harmful, things that can steer you away from trialed and tested medical interventions like psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. So, but that is an issue, isn't it? That some people do come away having had a positive experience.
Yeah, and he's very careful as well, the exorcist, whenever I asked him a question like that could get him potentially in trouble. Are you telling people to stop going to doctors, to stop going to hospitals? He always said, no, we insist that you do go alongside what we're doing.
Right.
And again, it makes no sense, because either your stuff works or it doesn't. It's not like it works if you go to a doctor, but that's again the cognitive situation they get themselves into, the mental gymnastics. It's crazy. I think that was the fact that it seemed to actually work was fantastic for our film. It's boring otherwise. It's boring making a film of like, what's going to happen. We go in, we see an exorcist, it's all a fraud, and they don't get better. They do get better. They feel much better. They're like, over this one woman in particular I talked about before, her name was Candela, 17 years old, slitting her wrists and things, and we go and see her in the film a month or two later, and she is just like brimming from ear to ear. Is that a word, brimming? No, grinning. She is just very happy. Is that a word, grinning?
It sounded right. I accepted it without question, so I don't know what that says about my skepticism.
She is brimming.
Yeah.
It's probably a really horrible thing.
Yeah, but means something completely different, which is probably... Yeah, defame that poor lady.
Yes, I have. But yeah, she was so happy. Her family are happy. Oh, thank God, thank the Exorcist, thank everything. And this was like, oh wow, something's going on here. And obviously it was like the suggestion, the placebo, the very thing that got her to scream and scream in the church in front of me. Again, if there's a religious person listening to me, they'd be saying, wow, that's mental gymnastics on your part, and I have to accept that, I suppose. We went to see the psychiatrist where one of these women used to be. This psychiatrist basically told us that the Exorcist was often taking people, and many exorcists around the area are doing this. They're taking people out of psychiatric wards, that they're sort of going scouting almost for sort of young, vulnerable teenagers who they then do these big exorcisms on. And look, in many ways, it was probably more helpful for her than any of the doctor stuff was for a certain amount of time. And there is an argument for that being okay, because again, what the psychiatrist told us is there is a stage of adolescence. I'm sure we all know people who've, mental health is an issue for people of all ages, of course, but adolescence is when it really can hit you. There can be like a temporary time, and once you get past it and you're 18 or 19 or 20, sometimes it just goes away, sometimes it stays. And if you are one of those people who it's going to go away for, well, why not have a year where you just feel better from The Exorcist? And then the thing with this woman Candela, we went back to see her a year later, and then she was the opposite. She completely disavowed me of any notion of, that it had worked, that it had made her feel better. She was worse than ever. So it's a temporary relief, and it's not good to fill these people's heads with mumbo jumbo. They need to know that it takes hard work to get better.
Yeah, and obviously it can be seen to be stealing time, can't it? When taking you away from more effective treatments. It got a bit dicey for you towards the end of this documentary. But you've got these people who have got power, they've got authority, they're spiritual leaders there, which seems to carry a lot of weight in certain communities, and they're obviously making considerable sums of money carrying out exorcisms. And then there's you, this skeptic, poking around with a camera crew, and they weren't too pleased about that towards the end of the documentary. There was actually a moment when you were separated from your crew and were sort of given a bit of a dressing down by the priest. He wasn't particularly happy. What exactly happened there?
I had been asking a lot of silly questions. Are vampires real? And I kept expecting him to sort of, is this, it's almost like when you're playing that old game, what is it, Buckaroo? How much can you put on before he erupts and realizes I'm not being entirely sincere with him?
I love that, sorry to interrupt, but I love that moment. I had a genuine chuckle when you were told that the priest was a bit under the weather, and you asked whether or not it was demons, which I thought that was not a sincere question, but funny nonetheless.
I love that, man. I'm just in my element.
Yeah.
And it feels like punching up, because as you say, these are people with power. I tried to focus on him mostly, the Exorcist. This was one of his clergy, but I couldn't resist it because he feels like he's not well. The thing was, he was avoiding us. I don't think he was unwell. He was avoiding us because I kept asking more and more ridiculous questions, but then also questions a lot about his relationship with this woman called Paula, who we learned only halfway through had been another woman who had schizophrenia, and he had exorcised and then was always by his side. And they seemed to be living together upstairs, although no one confirmed this for us or not. Later on, I ended up having a talk with a journalist who loves them. One of the journalists who's like a tabloid journalist who takes them very seriously. He's like the Exorcist's mouthpiece to the rest of the country. And this journalist was telling me about all the plans they had together to film, multiple exorcisms together, like 10 exorcisms at a time, and sensationalist mad stuff. And for whatever reason, an hour later, I get called, after speaking to this journalist about what he was doing there, I got called into like this cupboard, basically, like a little closet, with the Exorcist and a few of his clergy. And I'm like, they wouldn't let the camera in, or my assistant or anything. It was just me alone they would allow in. Close the door, and I was suddenly like, what's going on here? Something's gone wrong. And it emerged that this tabloid journalist had told the priest that I was asking about why the Exorcist kisses this young girl, Paula, on the mouth. It was something I'd never seen or thought of or said. And it looked like the journalist was just trying to stir things up between us. It wasn't something that surprised me, though, because something was a bit off with their relationship. And as far as I know, it wouldn't have been illegal. She was about 18 or 19 when they met. It just wouldn't look good for a 50-year-old priest to be taking a girl from a psychiatric home. Maybe that is illegal. I don't even know. I should know. But yeah, they started really having a go at me, and I was saying, I promise I didn't say that. You can check the video recording that we did. And he refused. And it ended up again being about an hour or so of this guy going berserk at me, screaming like, you say sir when you talk to me, I'm the bishop here, how dare you guys took the Falklands, you did this and that. And I was like, I'm sorry about the Falkland. I'm sorry about everything. I was, I'm not used to that kind of, I'm not used to conflict, and I'm not getting in a fight. The thing was, me and my friend David Hayes, who's a fantastic director and friend of mine, and we filmed this, just the two of us. The BBC hadn't commissioned it. They weren't that interested because it was Argentina, it was too far away and everything. So I thought, it's just too good of a story, so we're just going to do it anyway. So we just borrowed equipment, we borrowed whatever, and just put stuff together and made it. I think the film can be better sometimes that way anyway, less polished, But the thing was, we were out at like 1 a.m. in the impoverished suburbs of Buenos Aires, middle of nowhere. Nobody knew where we were. Nobody knew anything about us. He had about 500 people out there waiting for a mass that he was about to do. That's in the hall, and then thousands outside on the streets gathering and becoming, fervent and crazy. And we just thought, they might kill us. This is exactly the kind of thing you read about. And, it is a bit extreme, but you read about this stuff. We thought they could kill us here. So my legs just turned to jelly, which is not a great reaction. You want an evolutionary reaction that enables you to actually fight and run or whatever. I was jelly for some time. It was a really, really scary experience. He screamed and screamed and screamed. Eventually they did let us go. And we sort of, squished out of this packed church of crazed people, just, all the religious stuff you can expect. We got out and we were like, again, outside, thousands of people around us. We thought, how are we going to get home to the center of Buenos Aires? How are we going to get a taxi? All this stuff. And then David, the director, suddenly turned to me and said, "Oh man, I wasn't filming when you left the church. I need to film you walking out." So I was like, "Well, we're not going back in." He was like, "We're going to have to go back in." Both of us petrified, like the most scared we've ever been. So we squished back between everyone and went all the way back, trying to avoid the exorcist seeing us, and then filmed me walking out again. Scariest moment in my life.
Wow, yeah, no, I can imagine. I'm not sure many other people would have had a different response to that scenario. Obviously, foreign country, off the grid in a sense, not under the watchful eye of the BBC and all the protections that might afford. So how then did this documentary become, how did it then fall under the BBC banner? What was that collaborative process like?
It took a couple of years, a year and a half, I think. We put it together. I had to learn how to edit and all of this stuff, which was hard work because we had to, I'm copywriting and stuff to earn money to get by, and David was doing odd jobs and stuff to get by, and the two of us were sort of meeting at midnight every night to try and edit the film, which we'd never done. We were editing an hour-long film together. Put it together, and then just went on LinkedIn and looked for names of people at the BBC. Because at this point I had made documentaries before, and some had gone out on HBO, but they were short docs. They weren't like a big hour-long or 40-minute-long thing. So it was just a case of, a year and a half. I got a lot of emails back saying that, unfortunately, I looked too much like Louis Theroux. The head of Channel 4 actually got back to me and said that. He said, unfortunately, you look too much like Louis, and we can't be seen to be copying the BBC. But eventually, after it took, honestly, a year and a half, and then somebody at the BBC replied one day. I must have sent 1,000 emails a day. It's so funny because you always hear these stories about like J.K. Rowling or the Beatles or Oasis, and they got rejected 7 times before they got accepted. And I'm like, I got rejected 7 times before breakfast every day. That's 7 times is a luxury. Sound like Monty Python now, but it took a long time. Somebody eventually, they said, I'll have a look at it. And that was like gold dust in my email inbox. Like, oh my God, someone's going to watch the film. They're going to watch the film. At the same time, we were sending it to festivals, which costs money as well. So you can only send it to a few, but it got into a festival and it won an award, Best International Documentary. So then we were able to go back to the BBC and keep pushing and pushing. Please just watch it. It's won awards. It's done everything. And eventually a guy watched it. He said he might take it, and then he moved to a different job. Somebody else then had a go, and it went a few people down the line, and after a few months they said they would take it. We got a production company called Villager Films involved, a very, very small company who hadn't had this kind of thing done, but they were willing to like finesse the edit and stuff without payment and stuff like that. And then we basically gave it to the BBC, all rights forever in perpetuity worldwide for like less than just no money. I didn't make a single penny from it in the end, which was a bit of a shame, but it got my name out there,
I mean, it's stellar work, and I really enjoyed it. I suppose, my first question would be, how did you maintain patience in that sense? Because I think I would have just dropped it on YouTube. Been so desperate just for people to see it. I wouldn't have been thinking as smartly as you were on the topic.
I think it was tough to sit on the project that long. You're right. It's tough to sit on something that you know or you think is good that you've done. You want to get it out there, but you know as well, I imagine from YouTube, I don't know how far along. I mean, I know with me, I pop something on there. Sometimes it might get a few thousand views. Sometimes it will get about 11 views.
Yeah.
You know?
It's inconsistent.
And yeah, I couldn't, as opposed to podcasts like the audio form, which tends to be more cumulative. It tends to sort of go up each week more or less. I find YouTube complete random. And I thought the amount of work we've done, we know this is good. So you start with the BBC and stuff, and then you start asking smaller channels, and then you start asking websites, but nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to look at it. And it took such a long time, but I'm happy I waited. I guess I never imagined they wouldn't take it once they'd watched it, which might feel arrogant or overconfident. I just felt I just got to get them to watch it. And I think the fact that we gave it to them basically for free probably helped. It didn't cost them anything. So,
Well, since they did accept it in the end, and it's obviously, it's done well on YouTube and a lot of people have seen it, are they more receptive to the idea of working with you going forward? You'd think that would earn you at least some sort of credibility with them and respect in terms of producing new content.
No, it went completely the other way. I found anyway. I did manage to get like an agent from it who's been very helpful with setting me up with lots of production companies and stuff. She's the agent who represents some big names like James May and Ben Fogle and stuff, and she's brilliant. Sets me up with lots of people. And I managed to get, because this was BBC Three, the Exorcist film came out on, I managed to get meetings with the BBC Three documentary team. And I was hoping that I could, having made the whole documentary myself and I could speak all these languages and stuff, I could be what they have with Stacey Dooley or Reggie Yates or whatever. Why not, And I went into some meetings. I went into this particular one of the BBC documentary team, and I got a feeling that I was just hated. I just felt... the head guy was nice, and then he had like a team of younger producers, I guess, they just happened to be women. I think it was 3 women I was sat with, and they just looked at me like I was dirt. That's how it felt at the time. Anyway.
Well, why would they do that? Is this a class thing?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a class, and this gets us onto the woke stuff. And I got to be a little bit careful because I've still got stuff in with them now, and I'm at a point now where it's like, how much do I talk about this? Because And how long do I wait? Because it's been now 3 years or so, or 2 years since the Exorcism film came out. I've got loads of other stuff I've made that I think is better than or as good as, and they won't even look at it. But I'm constantly thinking there's a new one that they might look at. I've got to be careful not to say anything. But then if I don't say anything now, then my podcast won't be as interesting. This interview won't be as interesting. I need to start thinking of myself and not always thinking of like, oh, I might offend the BBC. It definitely felt like it was because I was a white man. It was something I was told from the very beginning, before the Exorcism stuff, when I first wanted to get into making documentaries. I went to see a couple of producers who were maybe like friends of friends or whatever, and they all said like, look, you might be able to do this, but not as an on-screen presence because things are changing. They will not take a young white man as a presenter now. And they said at the time this might just be temporary. And it's now 7 or 8 years later, and it's just all that's happened is it's got a lot worse. Or if people might be in favour of that, so worse isn't the right term. But I felt sat there like, hey, I've done all this stuff, and come on, something. And they just looked annoyed at me. The one guy who did seem to like me a bit moved on a few weeks later. So then when I emailed, he was saying, hey, now this producer who was in the room is now the head of that department. I tried her. And yeah, she just seemed annoyed I was messaging her. It was basically go away kind of thing. So that was that really with them.
There's been a lot made in the news about BBC posting jobs specifically for BAME candidates. There's a lot of, it seems to me, diversity quotas to fill and a push towards inclusion, but I often find that diversity tends to mean just fewer white people, depending on where you look, strangely. Yeah. But a lot of people hearing that from you might be skeptical of that claim. There's a lot of, the consensus tends to be that white people such as us have all the privilege. We can knock down barriers that non-white people can't even get past. So how would you answer that sort of thing to people who are looking in now thinking, it might not be anything to do with your skin color?
It's very, very complex, isn't it? It's really, really complex because obviously, to completely deny I had any advantages from being a white man from a middle class background would also be going the other way. I think it's just I don't necessarily agree with positive discrimination. It's a really complex matter, and people don't want to believe anything that runs counter to their beliefs, you know? So if somebody is very woke, they don't want to believe that this is happening right now. Their first thought will be it's not happening. And if you prove it to them, they'll say, well, it should be happening because white people have had advantages for so long. But I didn't get any of that. You know, my ancestors, no, I don't want to get into, you know, my ancestors who's got a worse victim or what, you know, whatever. It shouldn't, I see people as individuals. And as an individual, I'm sure I've had loads of advantages, but I mean, how are you going to weigh up everybody's advantages? Reggie Yates, not to be too critical, but I mean, he's a guy who was a child actor. So he sort of just grew up as a documentary maker. He was a DJ, child actor, documentary maker. He could do what he wants, get sent out to Russia. And then he goes on a podcast and says stuff about, don't give all your money away to fat North London Jews, right? He goes out and says that. Did you see that?
No, this is the first I've heard of this.
Exactly. Happened around exactly the same time that, what was the fella's name who made the joke about the Queen's baby? The Prince.
Danny Baker.
It was around the same time as that. And the difference in reaction to the two of them is insane in terms of press coverage and stuff. So the thing is, it wouldn't even be a huge problem if it was just the BBC doing this. What's difficult for people like me, I think people will listen and go, well, you know, it's like if you're a footballer, you didn't get a chance to go to Man United because of the bad circumstances, you can still play for Sunderland, you know. The problem is, this is happening at every level. So it's got to a point where people will say like, oh, well, you couldn't work for the BBC, you can go somewhere else. No, you can't. You can't, because everyone, I mean, Channel 4 is 10 times more like that. They won't even answer my emails. They're angry if my agent messages them about me. They don't want anything to do with a young white person getting into their business. So it is tough. And I suppose what I would say is the first thing to look at if people are skeptical is Diversity Diamond, right? That is what the TV channels use as their survey to look at whether they have enough diversity on screen. Over the last 6 years, the BAME or BAME, which British for ethnic minorities, they take up 13% of the British workforce, but 24% of on-screen presence on TV. So what quota? At what point is it enough? Why are they, despite seeing that, and that didn't make any news headlines, that came out a few months ago. Also, that was over the last 6 years, and as we all know, things have gotten a lot stronger in the last few years. So I can only imagine what it is right now. It's 24% over the last 6 years. The thing is, whenever people listen to it, a lot of people are like, well, you know, we've had it good. They're not bothered until it happens to them. So it's only when I explained to a friend of mine who I was having this debate with, he was against me the whole way through. He's an open-minded guy, but he was like, no, but Andrew, you've got to realize this and that. He's training to be a doctor. And I said to him, okay, from now on, when you graduate, despite all your hard work, you're not going to be able to work at the best hospitals or any of the hospitals because of who you are, because of your skin color. How do you like the whole, you know, positive discrimination thing now? And that was finally the moment when he was like, yeah, I wouldn't like that. So we're selfish human beings, aren't we? And it's when it happens to us.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And as a side note, people feel a little bit reluctant to speak out about these things when they're living it as well, because any pushback to it is labelled racism straight away, when really a lot of people just want an even playing field for everybody. I do hear from people privately who don't say things publicly, and I'm talking about people in the police, people in the fire brigade, people at academia, people in the media, all tiers of our public life are sort of concerned about this push and re-racialization of our society. And you've already brought up the idea of woke ideology, and one of the things that got me interested in it, or put it on my radar, was the fact of how sort of comparable it is to a really fundamentalist religion. There's some dogmas, they have their own speech codes, a lot of it's faith-based thinking, which is not necessarily underpinned by any credible data. And however, I spend a lot of time on it, and it sometimes can become difficult to know, because whether or not it's as prominent as I believe it to be, because I'm sort of living it and investing it and investigating it in that sense. So, I mean, how do you feel about woke ideology, in the sense that many people think it's the be all and end all of our discussion. It's infected everything. You know, the end is nigh kind of rhetoric, and some people think it's all overblown. It's essentially just students running amok, and they'll grow up and become conservatives at some point as soon as they get a mortgage. Essentially, I mean, where are you on the scale of we're all going to die via woke, and it's not a big deal?
I think it's bad, you know. That's how I feel right now. I'll change my mind in a few weeks, I'm sure. I think that's important. You have to be able to go back and forward a little bit. It is a case of like, look, it's happened to me. And I'll be completely honest. I'm happy to be totally honest, right? If it had been the case that they had taken the Exorcist film straight away, actually paid me a good amount of money that I feel they would have had to have made sure they did if I were from a minority that people care about. I mean, the Jews doesn't count because it's seen as punching up, which is a whole other thing. If they'd taken it and then given me another one and another one and another one, and now I'm a big documentary maker, do you think I would be sitting here talking about woke stuff? Not in a million years, because I'm a selfish bastard like all of us, you know. I would sit here and just be like, ignore that. And I probably wouldn't even think it's wrong, because I would think, well, I've done well, you know. So I would just be like, it's fine, we're redressing societal imbalance, everything's all right. So again, it's that case of when it happens to you, people suddenly start to care. I think the issue is this, and I think what grates us the most is that the people who are very woke think they're on the right, like the righteous side. Yeah. You know, that's really grating. And it means you get woke capitalism. And I know, I think you're friendly with, or you've interviewed Andrew Doyle. Right?
Yes.
And he does a lot of that stuff, like, you know, the woke capitalism stuff. That's scary, you know. There are real world consequences. Sadiq Khan, as you mentioned, the police forces, 40% he wants, 40% BAME in London. He announced that the other day. That sounds insane. Yeah. 40%. And the problem is, if we're going to look at why does this matter? Why does this matter for when it doesn't affect you personally? The issue is, if you don't want somebody like Trump in charge, maybe you do, that's fine. You're welcome to your vote, right? But if you don't want those kinds of people in charge, the woke way is not the right way, because you're alienating people. I'm an example. As I say, I would still be a happy-go-lucky centre-left, so what's woke? I don't even know about that if I had not felt badly treated by it. I'm certainly not in the minority. There are a lot of angry people feeling that they can't get normal jobs, they can't put food on the table, and they're being told they're privileged. They're not going to vote. You know, when you've got a Labour Party that's obsessed with Israel, Jews, and trans rights, and it's like there are people who can't like feed their families. Those are the traditional Labour voters. Doesn't
go well when you're sort of campaigning door to door, does it? The whole Israel-Palestine dispute and trans rights is not the kind of thing most families are too invested in at this point in time.
No, and it doesn't mean they're not valid points. It doesn't mean that trans people shouldn't be able to fight for their rights. Absolutely. I don't think, as in, you know, there was issues with freedom of speech in Canada and stuff. I love J.K. Rowling. I want to make that clear. But hey, of course, like any minority, they're in danger of whatever it might be, and there are horrible people out there. There are always horrible people who want to take people's rights away. So those are real issues. Israelis settling on Palestinian land, that's a real issue. As a Jewish person myself, I take offense though when somebody's banging on about Israel, and I say, "Oh yeah, what do you think about what's going on in Russia or China or
Syria?"
Yemen? They don't know. They don't even know there's an issue there. Yeah. So, you know.
Yeah, I do find the far left fascination with Israel a little bit sinister, I'll be honest. But I suppose that's a whole 4-hour conversation for another time. Yes. But I mean, we're essentially talking about how racialized our society has become in every area. And you're somebody who's well traveled. You speak a number of different languages. And how would you compare what's going on in the UK in terms of race relations compared to other places? Are we further ahead in that sense? Are we falling behind other nations?
So this is the funny thing, because this was exactly I think this was the thing that Lawrence Fox got so much flack for saying, wasn't it? Did he say? I'm not sure if it was something else. Was it that?
Yes, on Question Time, I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said that living in Britain is one of the least racist places on planet Earth, I think he said.
I mean, that's certainly my experience. So I've lived in, different cities around France, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, and I can't remember, around and live in short stays in other places. I've learned the languages. So everywhere I've gone, I've made sure like I'm not some gap year student. I'm like sitting and immersing myself with real people from there, and those become my friends. I go and play football with them. I go down the park with them. We have a picnic or a barbecue together, whatever it might be, vegetarian barbecue. But they are like us in the 1950s in that the things they call each other, they will call, one of the guys who's got slightly smaller eyes, they will call him Chino, like
Chinese.
China. Yeah. They will, again, somebody who looks maybe a bit like me, they might say the Jew, or the way they talk to each other.
Is this
a different level?
Is this malicious, or is it what we would term banter? Because I think, and I have to be very careful here in terms of how you refer to people or what you say, but in company, people you're familiar with, people you have affection for, sometimes the limits of what is acceptable speech expands because you're in I suppose I don't want to say safe space, but you're in an environment where there's respect there and there's no true malice, and you can sort of push the boundaries. I mean, it's a very British thing, isn't it, to insult people out of affection in that sense?
Yeah, well, I guess when somebody's saying, Chinese person to someone because they look a bit Chinese, in Argentina, I'm saying, that might be fine for the person being called that. It's not fine for other Chinese people who happen to walk past and hear, or whatever it might be. So I wouldn't want to defend exactly how they talk, other than just point out that it's a world away from where we are in England in terms of racism. Colombia, exactly the same, the way they talk, which is why we've had problems in the past in football, where we've had players like Luis Suarez and a few other players who have said things like the word for black in Spanish and things like that, and they're amazed that they're being pulled up on it because it's just a very different culture. France, I lived in France for a couple of years. I mean, the issues they have there, it's just, again, a totally different level. Berlin, where I am now, so many neo-Nazis, so many clashes with like Turkish and Syrians and stuff. The Germans, I think, are fed up for another reason. I think a lot of them grew up having the Holocaust so firmly sort of thrown down their face, that they're tired of feeling that way. So a lot of them are very anti-politically correct, So I would definitely say, in my personal experience, that England is the least racist. It doesn't mean there's no racism.
Sure.
70 million people, So I probably know, grandparents and stuff. Of course, there's racism. You can't get rid of all of it.
What I like about this country, or certainly what is observable, is that if racism does manifest anywhere, it doesn't get treated with anything other than contempt. And this can apply to the tube, or a shopping centre, or on the radio, anywhere. I mean, if you get filmed saying something racist, or not even saying something racist, just something interpreted as being racist, that goes viral, that's shared everywhere, and people condemn it, and that's essentially the end of public life for you. It's possibly the end of your employment, and
that's why you called someone a paedophile, isn't it? Was that you?
Yes, I do. I do. Hobby of mine is to label people paedophiles whenever they call me a racist for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, which is slanderous, because it's really slanderous being called a racist. I just want to get on your point about being known as a racist. I had a guy from Hope Not Hate on the podcast who used to be like a racist guy, and now he became a spy, a mole with the BNP and all of that, to report on what their activities. And one of obviously the main sort of breeding grounds for that kind of BNP leafleting and stuff were football matches. So he used to go to like Crystal Palace games. And he said even there, he was handing out the stuff to people who would say horrible racist things in the game. But once he said, like, hey, sign up to our organization, they would spit at him.
Yeah.
These are the people who are closest to being racist we can imagine. And they were disgusted by the idea of signing up to a racist organization. And this was back in the 90s. So you're right. I think nobody race after paedophile, racist is probably the worst thing someone can call you.
Yeah, you really used to. I'll be really honest, that when I first started engaging in public discussion or turning my attention to the problem of Islamic fundamentalism, being called racism used to hurt. It really, I'd be very indignant. How fucking dare you call me racist? It really, because I grew up in a sort of anti-racist climate. I went through a schooling system which was very much on top of promoting an anti-racist ethos. I live in North Manchester in a working class environment. It's very diverse, and then to be told that you are racist because you're critical of an ideology wasn't pleasant. But then you soon realise that people reach for this label because society does hate racists. They want to pin it to you, to smear you, and silence you, in effect. But I suppose that leads to my question of whether or not this re-racialization of everything might lead to adverse effects coming over the hill. I'm talking about pouring fuel on the fire of white nationalism, for instance. A lot of people might see that as a somewhat reasonable response to the current climate we have.
I think like I say, for two reasons, I felt myself moving, and I don't want to say left to right because it's not left to right, is it? It's sort of woke to not woke, I suppose. I felt myself moving away for two main reasons. One, of course, was what I just talked about, was the not being able to get a job. I can't get the most simple jobs now because they all have in the tweets for like, can you, we're looking for people to write an article. Underneath will be hashtag diversity, hashtag BLM. They won't reply to me. They will not reply to me. So that's one reason. It's like I'm self-interested and I need to live. I need to earn some money, The second one, of course, is the Jewish issue. My family's Jewish. If I'm completely atheist, I don't even like just congregating with people from a certain religion because I don't like that sort of segregation. So most of my friends are not Jewish. I don't hang out in those circles, but I'm very aware all the time. In the back of your mind, you're aware of two things. One, if Israel didn't exist, it would be quite scary because it means something else could happen and we wouldn't have that backup. The second thing, just if somebody got in who was like Corbyn, it might push people to, my sister got chased down the street. I don't know how they knew she was Jewish, but they were shouting, effing Jew at her, trying to get her. I've experienced all sorts of anti-Semitism over the years. It never made me think there's a systemic or systematic problem with racism or anti-Semitism. It just made me think there are bastards in the world and there's not much you can do about it. I got called Shylock at university. Also, the amount of people. What really does annoy me actually is when it comes from a lefty woke person, because they are so careful about every other minority. And then we'll sit down for lunch and then they'll say like, are you going to pay for that or not?
Okay.
The amount I've heard that. And you do. And the thing is, you joke about it and then you do have in your mind like, God, I better not owe anyone money now because they'll think that. And I better not give them too much money either because they think I'm being flashy with it. So you do have this. And obviously the whole Corbyn thing and seeing that very woke group who just denied all of it was very painful. Again, like when it's so funny, when you get criticism from the right, it doesn't really hurt. And I'm not saying that for all minorities. Of course, it's very different if you're black and you're walking around and a bunch of right-wing thugs attack you. That's awful. But I'm talking about on YouTube, every video I put, if somebody disagrees with it, they'll put, Andrew Gold, brackets, Stein, or brackets, Berg. The irony being it was Goldstein, and my dad changed it when he was younger because he used to get bullied for being Jewish and he wanted to make it less Jewish. So all sorts of stuff. And you just go, well, you're an idiot who sits at home with a tinfoil hat on and smears poo over the walls. I don't care. When it comes from a lefty intellectual and they're sort of denying what's happening with Corbyn and saying that murals of guys with big noses are fine and the Jews are rich, so it doesn't matter, that's very painful. It actually hurts. That's like, oh my God, it's like, I'm not safe here. That's how it starts to feel. So that's moved me a bit. So what about somebody who was already a bit further along that line, or somebody who, look, I'm fine, I can't really get any jobs with writing at the moment, but I've got the podcast now. I'll do well, I'll do fine. What about people who can't put food on the table? What about people who are really struggling to get any form of work? They're going to move, and then they'll see a group of some sort of right-wing group. It's going to feel more and more appealing. So I blame the whole woke thing for Brexit, although it's very complicated matter, Brexit, but certainly Trump. So it's definitely scary for that reason.
Sure. Well, I'm still holding on to a resurgence of the sensible left. I'm not seeing many signs of that at the moment. But tell me a little bit about your podcast then, On the Edge. It's called what? When did you start podcasting, and what did you decide you were going to focus on? What sort of things tend to grab your interest that you think are worthy recording a conversation about?
I think it was just a matter of, it's all the stuff we've talked about, but I guess it was 6 months ago I started finally. I was putting it off, and I'm sure you'll relate to this as well, because you just think everyone has a podcast.
Yeah.
There are like more podcasts than there are people listening to them. So you think like, what more can I add, and how am I going to get through and make any indents in this? When there's so crowded, such a crowded market. But I did think like I am quite I'm quite good at making these documentaries and stuff. I'd made another couple of ones. I'd made another sort of short one with a paedophile, and there's this one about abortion I made, and I can't get BBC people to reply to my emails or to look at it and stuff.
How do you break the ice with a paedophile documentary, though? That's putting you on the back foot straight away, surely.
It does, but like they've done them before, and I think it's Louis Theroux did one as well where he went to meet paedophiles and stuff, and they are just people can't take their eyes away from that kind of stuff. We're fascinated, and I think part of it is a Schadenfreude. Part of it's like, thank God that's not me. When you watch these people. But I thought I've got interesting stuff. I had years and years of stuff that I thought was so interesting, just from so much research around the world, people that I'd wanted to interview for documentaries that weren't made. So I thought I've got all this material. So yeah, episode 6 or something is this guy who was the class president or head boy at his school. He's 18 and is a paedophile who I managed to track down. Took years to get hold of people like that because they're all anonymous. I don't know their real names. And I talked to him for an hour on this podcast, and it's just a fascinating insight. And I'm hard on him, and I push him and stuff. And he's saying, I can't change what I am. I can't change, and all this. I would never touch a kid, all this stuff. And I just think, why not have more podcasts like that? So then there's an ex-Muslim whose family are trying to kill her at the moment for blasphemy laws. There's a Westboro Baptist person. There's psychopath who I'm talking to on the camera, and I'm saying to her, like, what if I had a heart attack on the screen now? Would you mind that? And she's like, no. And then I'm like, well, what if someone came in and started stabbing me and like cutting up my organs? And she's like across the screen going like, I don't think you get this. Like, I'm a psychopath. I don't care. And,
wow.
Yeah, those experiences are like, I live for that. So that's what the podcast has been about.
Well, just to move on something and fixate on something that's probably not controversial then at all, let's keep on this this topic of paedophilia, because like you say, it is the ultimate taboo in terms of the discussion. I mean, I'm sure we both agree that the welfare of children and minors is paramount. It must be the number one focus of any investigation regarding paedophilia. However, it's seen as one of the most, if not the most evil possible thing a person can engage in. Yeah. So obviously, there's a distinction to be made there between somebody who is sexually attracted to children, who hasn't or acted on it or claims to have no intention to, versus people who do prey on children and break the law. And there's a line there in terms of what's legal and what isn't. And I suppose it all comes down to being able to understand it better, because coming from a better place of understanding can possibly help you combat the issue more, make more reasonable decisions in response to it. So I suppose my question is then, if you're speaking to somebody who claims to be sexually attracted to children, obviously your emotional response off the bat might be one of hostility, disdain, revulsion, which are all perfectly acceptable responses to that. However, when you talk to some of these people, you can find them to be worthy of compassion if you think about it in terms of an ailment or a mental illness, and that can be quite difficult to deal with, hearing somebody who's making sense and somebody who's quite clearly suffering from a disorder perhaps. So how do you deal with that? How do you find that balance between talking to the bogeyman essentially and maintaining an air of objectivism about it?
It's a good name for the book, actually. I'm going to write that down, Talking to the Bogeyman.
Talking to the Bogeyman.
I like that. At the moment, it's like the work in progress. I've written 60,000 words, and I've got a literary agent, but it's just, again, it's been a struggle because even mentioning the word paedophilia.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be a bit like the psychopath test, John Ronson.
Okay.
Which just looking at a really strange, unknown group of people. Right. So, I mean, the first thing to think about is they make up 1 out of 100 men are exclusive paedophiles. Right. That's a lot. So what piqued my interest was seeing that statistic, living in Berlin, where they have the world's only clinic that doesn't report paedophiles under any circumstances to the police. It's very controversial because obviously it means that they can come in and say that they did this and that with a child and they won't be reported to police.
That sounds insane.
Yeah, it is insane.
So just again, this clinic, is this a treatment clinic exclusively for people who claim to be paedophiles?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
They have issues. You know what's really interesting actually is that people go in for treatment a lot of the time, and one of the first things that they do, this clinic, is they try to find out if they're really paedophiles. They don't believe them because a lot of people, a surprising amount of people, have actually got some form of OCD where they convince themselves that they are paedophiles. So they even get them to like sit down and watch like things that look like they could be arousing if it was like child porn kind of thing, and they show no reaction, and they'll say like, "Mate, you're not a paedophile."
That's really weird.
Fear. It's a big thing, and I even got speaking on my podcast. There was one with a music journalist, an NME music journalist, but James McMahon, NME, and he talks publicly about this. He tweets a lot about it. That he is convinced he's got severe OCD. Is what we talk about the whole time, and it's all about intrusive thoughts. And he's convinced. He told me at the beginning that people that will think he's a serial killer because I had this experience with the whole paedophile thing. I thought, is he saying serial killer, but he means paedophile? So I waited till we got chatting a little bit more, and half an hour later I said, do you ever worry that people will think you're a paedophile? And he said, yes. And now he started tweeting openly about that. Everyone he meets, he thinks they will think he is a paedophile because of how he looks, because of what his mind is just going, they think that, they think that, they think that. So that complicates things as well. But you've got about 1 out of 100 men. It's a much smaller amount of women. They're very rare, but they do exist, and I've met some. Met one. So it's a lot of people. It's a very weird clinic that allows that. Now, the reason that they don't report people, obviously, is it's the only way to get them in for therapy. And their way of thinking is like, yeah, if they don't report them to authorities, they'll actually come in and talk. And the hope is if you can even stop 1 or 2 of them from offending, then that's amazing. You've saved children's lives. And over the years, I imagine they have saved countless children's lives, but also allowed some awful people to go free on the street, you know? So
that is
really complex.
That is a very dangerous ethical situation there, isn't it? I mean, so if we are just to put our compassionate head on for a moment and put our emotions aside and consider this solely as perhaps a psychological malady, what are some of the reasons that come up in terms of causation for paedophilia? It's often thought of, or certainly in sort of armchair psychology, that a lot of paedophiles are actually victims of childhood abuse themselves, and that has an effect on them in that sense. Is there anything you can point to that can give an explanation?
It's a weird one, and I think there's a lot of stuff in mental health. It was the same with the psychopath I spoke to. We know surprisingly little. Like I guess we think we have a big civilization and like houses and hospitals and things, and we know everything. We really don't. And like the consensus in Germany, they don't really talk about how it develops. They don't exactly know, but most people I've spoken to, the patients, have either been abused as a child or had a horrible upbringing. And one therapist in particular was saying to me, he thinks it is about becoming stuck in a moment of your childhood. Something goes wrong. So you'll be 8 years old, you fancy 8-year-olds. You're 9, or you don't, or you're 10 and you like 10-year-old girls. And at whatever moment it is, your sexual development becomes stuck in that moment. It's just a theory. It would explain, for example, maybe Michael Jackson, who didn't have a childhood, and his entire mental, it wasn't just his sexuality, everything seemed to be left as a child. So there is that. Then there's a British clinic I spoke to. They're the main people in Britain, called Stop It Now. And their head of the organisation completely disagrees with everything Germany says. And they think that Germany are doing a terrible thing by letting paedophiles indulge their fantasies and think that it's okay. In England, it's almost like a conversion therapy thing where they say, we believe we can cure it. Which shocked me. I didn't think that was going on. And I said to this guy, but isn't that like gay conversion therapy? And he said, no, because homosexuality is a sexuality. In his mind, paedophilia is not a sexuality. It's an illness that comes about when somebody is very lonely, very unable to trust people their own age, unable to form bonds with adults, and they look for children. I think the overall consensus probably is a little bit nearer to, like the worldwide is a bit nearer to the German model of it's a kind of sexuality that's been stuck rather than an illness that can be cured.
Right. But I suppose all I can really say about that is good luck trying to get that book published. Although, however, I mean, it doesn't matter how inquisitive and objective you are about this, and how much you set your stall out from the beginning about the importance of the welfare of children being paramount, and making all the perfectly sane and logical and rational noise about this, you will be pointed at by a significant number of people as a defender of paedophilia or somebody who excuses it. And this is certainly exacerbated by the prominence of social media and online journalism. And is there not a part of you that just thinks, what's the point? What? It's not worth my time or effort to look into a very serious and interesting area of our society, and it's not worth doing that just for the finger pointing I'm going to receive. I mean, there must be a lot of people who shy away from taboo topics for this reason alone.
I think if I were at the stage of my career that John Ronson's at now, I think I wouldn't probably take this risk, because what's the point?
Yeah.
And I thought that from the very beginning. I thought, this is so crazy. But then I almost got on the Joe Rogan podcast, not that close, but I emailed them, and we got a few emails back and forward, and they were saying, would you fly out to America to discuss that? So as much as there'll be people who hate it, there's going to be probably even more people who would love to read about that. I mean, what a fascinating unknown group of people. Just a few weeks ago, I was in some village in Germany interviewing a 25-year-old woman who is attracted to babies. And I just kept my mind the whole time. I kept saying, but are you sure? And she was like, she was offended. There's so much to learn about these people. Like, she was offended because she has pride. And this is the funny thing, a lot of them do. So you imagine a paedophile being a very depressed, suicidal person. A lot of them are. Most of the ones I've spoken to, it's really surprised me to find, are proud. Even though they say, I would never offend, I know that's wrong, but it's my identity, it's who I am. It's weird. It's a weird, complex, screwed up thing. And you're right, I could be in a lot of trouble just for going into it, but I don't see it that differently to going to look at abortion or exorcism or talking about woke culture. I mean, you must get a lot of flack for that.
Yeah, and there are people who make a living going in talking to terrorists, literal murderers as well. And, it's one of them things that society, I suppose, has quite rightly put in the corner of instant disdain and hatred. So I'll be very interested to see what you come up with that, and I do wish you the best. This has flown by. I just checked my watch and we've been talking for an hour. Is there anything at all you want to talk about or get in before I let you get back to your afternoon? Perhaps point people to where they can find the podcast?
Oh, yeah. Well, people can get the podcast on, all the usual places, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Castbox, On the Edge with Andrew Gold. That's my name. I'm not the singer from the 80s. There was a singer in the 80s with my name, Bastard, who takes up all the Google rankings.
Unbelievable. I've of late started getting a lot of fan mail for Stephen Knight, the writer of Peaky Blinders, and it's not all positive, I have to say. So
I saw there was something you had to translate, wasn't there?
Yeah, I should have given you a call.
Yeah. People are mental, aren't they? Yeah, I've had a few of those before about that singer. But yeah, that's where they can get the podcast. It's quite a good podcast. It's give it a listen.
Perfect. Andrew, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.